Blood Decay has been reworked, and I'm wearing a blood shirt because all stars have aligned in the War Within with the new talents that the much awaited tank has been having with the hero talents as well. It's playing better, it has more options, it has Gorefiend's Grasp to grip everything. Finally, after 2 expansions, you can actually play it. So let's talk about everything that goes into the current version of Blood Decay. Why is it so much better, and why you should be excited about playing Death Knight as a tank in the War Within. First of all, as with all reworks, I do have to mention this just to kind of give you a little bit of a heads up. Things will constantly change. They have changed for Unholy and Frost since we've done the videos as well, and they keep improving each week or each other week or something like that, which is great, but it's good to keep in mind that, you know, things are not final and the devs are actually listening. One point just to clarify this as well, they did mention it in a blue post that the positioning of Gorefiend's Grasp, which you can probably see it on the screen right now, will change once the next or 2 other versions of the alpha or beta, actually, because betas are around the corner, will be released, because they have tested it internally and they figure out that the positioning is maybe not as optional as they would have wanted it, because it kind of maybe isn't, although it kind of is. We'll talk about it, because you can see it right now, it's in the middle of the screen. But with that out of the way, let's talk about a couple of things. First of all, we have a bunch of stuff made baseline, one of which being Death's Caress, and now you have room for talents. We have a few new talents. The first one you're probably going to notice is Ossified Vitriol. When you lose a Bone Shield charge, the damage of your next Marrowrend is increased by 15%, stacking up to 75%. That's particularly great because you're not pressing Marrowrend quite often, so you're most likely going to get the full benefit of Ossified Vitriol, since you only want to press Marrowrend when you're like 5-ish, maybe even stacks of Bone Shield below where you want to be, considering that most of the time you're going to be pressing Marrowrend when you also have Dancing Rune Weapon, and that kind of generates a full stack of Bone Shields all the way up to 10. So the chances of you getting full value out of this is very, very high. And now as we keep moving down, you will notice that Dancing Rune Weapon is very central and all the way to, let's say, the second part of the talent tree, and it goes down into a bunch of talents. We still have the Insatiable Blade, which is going to be very important, and to the left we have Gorefiend's Grasp with a new talent underneath it called Tightening Grasp. Gorefiend's Grasp cooldown is reduced by 30 seconds, and it now also silences enemies for 3 seconds, because now most tanks, except Bears and Brewmasters, have an AoE silence and kind of group control ability, with Prot Warriors having AoE taunt and silence, Paladins having the AoE damage, Avenger Shield and silence, and Vengeance Demon Hunter having just pure AoE silence on sigils. This seems to be a recurring theme, so we're going to have it with Gorefiend's Grasp as well. Now, whether or not that's going to be something that you take remains to be seen, because in the current iteration of the talent tree, it doesn't leave a lot of room to pick everything that you want if you want to take Titan's Grasp as well, but it is an option that you can use. Stuff like Rune Tap and Blood Tap have been moved all the way to the left hand side of the talent tree, and if you want to take improved Bone Shield, which you'll probably want to get that extra 10% haste, you'll either have to take Gorefiend's Grasp, which is why I mentioned that it might not be as optional as you want, or Rune Tap. Rune Tap is not something that you really want to take overall in the general content. This has very niche applications as Blood Decay if you want to be effective. This is a whole ongoing debate with how damage reduction functions for Blood Decay in terms of tankiness. You can still get it, it's not necessarily bad, but in Mythic Plus you're probably not going to get Rune Tap and maybe get Gorefiend's Grasp instead to go all the way down to improved Bone Shield. Now on the right hand side of the talent tree we have a new talent called Reinforced Bones, and this is going to be important for another reason. Increases armor gained from Bone Shield by 10%, and it can stack 2 additional times. Armor is neither here nor there, it's usually a relative stat that goes up and down based on how tanky the devs want their tanks to be. It's not something they can necessarily plan around. It's good to have it, it's not something that you'll probably go out of the way to stack, so that's not the important part of this talent. What is important clearly is the extra stacks of Bone Shield. You can go all the way up to 12. There are situations when you're pressing Dancing Rune Weapon and you're not quite at 0 Bone Shields, because that's bad, but you're at like 1 or 2 or 3 Bone Shields, and you need to press some Marrowrend so you can keep doing the other stuff and not worry about your Bone Shields dropping, and that sometimes can get you over the cap. Now with this, of course, that eliminate some of the issues of overcapping bone shields, but what's more important, this will work with the reworked Bone Storm. And we're kind of jumping around the talent tree, which is fine, but this is very important because they kind of tie in together. The new reworked Bone Storm is finally good, because it hasn't really been good for 2-3 expansions now. Now, Bone Storm is a 1-minute cooldown, and it will no longer consume your runic power, but instead consume your bone shield charges. And each bone shield charge it consumes, it increases its duration by 1, so or lasts 1 second per bone shield charge, and it consumes all the way up to 10, max 10. On the alpha, the footage that you're seeing right now, it actually is bugged, but we know how it's supposed to be functioning. On alpha, it consumes all of your bone shields, so it doesn't matter that you have 12, but once it hits live, and once you're getting behind the wheel of the Blood Decay, then you press Bone Storm, you'll still have 2 bone shields left if you are all the way up to 12 with the new Reinforced Bones talents, which obviously is great because you never really want to leave yourself open with no bone shield charges on you. And Bone Storm consuming bone shields has so many more implications. First of all, it makes so much sense being right after Shattering Bone, because now it actually functions with it. You instantly get a big chunk of AoE damage just by pressing Bone Storm, which is something that a lot of cooldowns have suffered from a lot of the years where you just press it and nothing happens for a couple of seconds. It's not that impactful. Not to mention that Snap Threat, which is when tanks do instance of burst damage, is something that you really want to be able to keep aggro, and this is what this is. When Bone Storm consumes instantly 10 bone shields, then Shattering Bone just gets a little bit of a little bit of damage, you know what I mean, to actually keep aggro on the targets. Not to mention that with the talent Insatiable Blade for Dancing Rune Weapon, Bone Storm is likely going to reduce the cooldown of Dancing Rune Weapon as well. This is also something to be debated because it's not currently working on the alpha, but it's normally supposed to be working because it makes sense. It's Insatiable Blade essentially makes it so that whenever you consume or, you know, drop a bone shield charge, you reduce the cooldown of Dancing Rune Weapon. Now, I doubt it's going to be remaining at 5 seconds, considering that you still have Tombstone, and together with Bone Storm, you can shave off quite a few seconds, probably about 75 seconds, I believe, off of the total cooldown reduction of Dancing Rune Weapon, which is quite a lot. It's a little bit too much. So it's likely that the cooldown reduction is going to be lower, which is fine. That's not necessarily bad. That's probably good because it actually adds synergy and functionality to your cooldowns that they can interact with each other a little bit more and bring a little bit of depth to Blood Decay and make the rotation a little bit more fun. Not to mention, incentivize you actually playing Bone Storm. Now, I don't know if it's going to be a single target thing, although Shattering Bone does quite a bit of damage, but it is an interaction that is very much welcome. There are 2 mentions, 2 talents currently not yet implemented. We've seen this with Unholy and with Frost, and Frost Decay has received one of these talents that lead into Breath of Sindragosa. We've covered it on our last stream, but for Blood, we don't know yet what they are. It's likely they have a couple of ideas. Maybe they're waiting to see how the rest of the talent tree functions to figure out exactly which one they implement to kind of work towards everything that goes down at the bottom of the talent tree for Blood Decay. Now, what's important is that also Blood Drinker and Consumption have been reworked, making them actual good talents. What Blood Drinker does now is drains 9 health from the target over 9, you know, numbers are subject to change. The damage they deal to you is reduced by 20% for the duration and 5 seconds after channeling it fully. You can move, parry, dodge, and use defensive abilities while channeling this ability, and it generates 20 additional runic power over the duration. This is fantastic. It's actually looking like a really good way to pull a boss. Now, I don't know if you can taunt during this ability. I don't think so. You're probably going to want to taunt before and then just instantly Blood Drinker if you want to pull a boss. You're probably not going to use this in Mythic Plus because in Mythic Plus you will use Consumption. Oh my god, I have waited since Legion for this to be good again. What Consumption does now is mostly the same thing. It strikes all enemies in front of you with a hungering attack that deals very little damage, unfortunately, and heals you for also very little because the damage is poop, and if the healing scales with the poop damage, the healing is probably going to be poop too. It does reduce damage beyond 8 targets. Now, there's 2 things that are very important here. Once you use Consumption, it will cause your Blood Plague damage to occur 50% 30% more quickly for 8 seconds. This is quite a bit of damage, specifically if you are also indenting rune weapon and you have about 3 blood plagues out. Making them all tick faster is pretty cool, pretty gnarly, in AoE of course. And probably the biggest change for consumption, it now generates 2 runes. This legit makes it a proper ability. Your rune economy is going to be incredible. This will probably make it so that you don't really feel like you need to take blood tap anymore, which that's great, it gives you a rune, but the consumption is so much cooler. And on top of all of these, something that's a little bit more abstract and it takes a bigger brain to understand if it's going to be super viable, a lot of the pathing has been enabled in the overall talent tree, so you can just get more options and not feel like you're hammered into some specific talents that you really need to make the spec function that, you know, have also been made baseline. This is the first iteration of the rework. It's already looking great and it already works really nicely with the hero talents, which we're going to talk about right now. And since we have been on the chapter of Marrowrend, let's talk about Deathbringer, bringing blood decay into a world of scythes and damage. If you don't know, Deathbringer will also give you a new button called Reaper's Mark. It's a 1-minute cooldown. It viciously slices into the soul of your enemy, dealing a little bit of damage, Shadow Frost by the way, so it's not physical, and applies Reaper's Mark. Each time you deal Shadow or Frost damage, add a stack of Reaper's Mark. After 12 seconds or after reaching 40 stacks, the mark explodes, dealing a little bit of damage per stack. Reaper's Mark travels to an unmarked enemy nearby if the target dies or explodes below 35% health when there are no enemies to travel to. This explosion cannot occur again for a target for 3 minutes. Why you need to understand that this is just pure damage until you actually put more points and see how the functionality of it goes. We also have Blood Fever. Your Blood Plague has a chance to deal 30% increased damage as Shadow Frost, going once again to the consumption thing. If everything overlaps, then consumption can just make Blood Fever do quite a bit of damage. You have Wave of Souls, add a little bit more oomph to Reaper's Mark. Reaper's Mark calls forth a burst of Shadow Frost energy, dealing more damage than the basic scaling of Reaper's Mark, as Shadow Frost damage both ways to all enemies caught in its path, so it's like a wave that goes front and comes back. Wave of Souls critical strikes cause enemies to take 5% increased Shadow Frost damage for 15 seconds, stacking up 2 times, and the wave back is always a critical strike, so this is a guaranteed at least 1 stack once the wave comes back to you. Another interesting talent is Grim Reaper. Reaper's Mark explosion deals up to 30% increased damage based on your target's missing health and applies Soul Reaper to targets below 35% health. This is incredibly good, specifically since you might not want to pick Reaper's Mark from the general talent tree anyway, and this just gives you a lot of execute damage. We have some defensive talents with Death's Bargain and Rune Carved Plates, where Death's Bargain, when you suffer a damaging effect equal to 25% of your max health, which happens for Blood Decay quite a bit, you instantly cast Death Pact at 50% effectiveness, may only occur once every 2 minutes. When Reaper's Mark explodes, the cooldown of this effect and Death Pact are reduced by 5 seconds. Now this is a lot of theory crafting that needs to be done, since Death Pact is something that's a little bit sketchy for Blood Decay. You haven't used it almost ever. I would really want to be able to use this cooldown because it's really cool thematically, but it hasn't really paid dividends in the last couple of expansions. While Rune Carved Plates makes each rune spent reduce the magic damage you take by 2%, and each rune generated reduces the physical damage you take by 2% for 5 seconds up to 5 times. This is particularly what I played with on the alpha, and with the rune economy of everything going on, specifically with consumption and the general economy of resources for Blood Decay, makes it so that you have quite a bit of uptime, if not 100% uptime on Rune Carved Plates. An interesting talent that I still want to figure out exactly how this works is Dark Talents. Marrowrend and Heartstrike have a 25% chance to increase the maximum stacks of an active Icy Talents by 1 up to 2 times. While Icy Talents is active, your runic power spending abilities also count as Shadow Frost damage. This depends exactly how it will be implemented in terms of how this damage stacks, because there are particularly a lot of talents in the Blood Decay talent tree that change how your runic spenders, which is just Death Strike, but also Bone Storm in this case. Death Strike does physical damage, and you have talents like Bloodshot. While Bloodshield is active, you deal 25% increased physical damage. This usually scales your Death Strike to bigger numbers. Now, does this mean that Bloodshot will increase the damage that Death Strike does because it increases its physical damage, and then Dark Talent talent transforms all of that Giga physical damage into Shadow Frost damage that will completely ignore the target's armor and deal even more damage. This remains to be seen. It sounds like that's how it's supposed to be working, but they could always go back on this design. But if they keep the design, this is really cool, and it can give Blood Decay some killer single target boss damage and raids, and that's kind of where Blood Decay hasn't really shown in the last couple of expansions. One of the more interesting choice notes is once again on the left hand side with Swift End and Painful Death. Swift End makes Reaper's Mark cost be reduced by 1 rune and its cooldown reduced by 30 seconds, bringing it down to 30 seconds and 1 rune cost, essentially just giving you a simple uptime increase. Painful Death makes Reaper's Mark deal 10% increased damage, and Exterminate empowers an additional Marrow Rend but now reduces its cost by 1 rune. Additionally, Exterminate now has 30% chance to apply Reaper's Mark. It's weird because you don't know what Exterminate is, do you? Because I didn't tell you yet. Well, that's because it's the capstone. So let's go to the capstone first. Exterminate, which is where Deathbringer becomes fucking amazing. After Reaper's Mark explodes, your next Marrow Rend costs no rune and summons 2 scythes to strike your enemy. The first scythe strikes your target for a lot of damage, Shadow Frost, and has a 20% chance to apply Reaper's Mark again. The second scythe strikes all enemies around your target for even more Shadow Frost damage and applies Frost Fever. This is just incredible. I mean, the visual animation is fucking amazing, just seeing the scythes go from left to right, up and down and all of that. And if you do end up playing Painful Death that I just mentioned before, the Reaper's Mark dealing 10% increased damage and Exterminate empowering an additional Marrow Rend and reducing its cost by 1 as well will essentially make Marrow Rend almost free. It's like a 1 rune cost. And if you use both of those Marrow Rends that are free, you essentially spend 2 runes for 2 Marrow Rends, essentially making 1 Marrow Rend completely free. And all in all, Deathbringer is a synergy of rune economy and damage dealing all around, which is exactly the Death Reaper, the Grim Reaper spec that we've been all waiting for. Now, the alternative is, of course, Sandlane, which is the Blood Death Knight themed hero talents. Sandlane revolves around Vampiric Strike. Your Death Coil and Death Strike have a 10% chance to make your next Heart Strike or Score Strike become Vampiric Strike. Vampiric Strike heals you for 3% of your max health and grants you Essence of the Blood Queen. This is the important part, increasing your haste by 1.5%, up to 7.5% total for 20 seconds. So essentially 5 stacks of this. Now, this is essentially where Blood Decay just becomes so fun to play. It just feels great. Sure, Vampiric Strike is nice and the animation is killer. It's essentially the Condemned animation from Warrior back in Shadowlands, and the haste is obviously pretty good. And then we keep going down to Blood-Soaked Ground. While you are within your Death and Decay, your physical damage taken is reduced by 5% and your chance to gain Vampiric Strike is increased by 5%, making Death and Decay even more important. Now we keep going down to Frenzied Bloodthirst. Essence of the Blood Queen stacks 2 additional times and increases the damage of your Death Coil and Death Strike by 2% per stack, meaning that it will go all the way to 7 total stacks, meaning that it will increase your Death Strike by another 14%, and we talked about the Death Strike increase earlier as well. Incite Terror makes Vampiric Strike, Heart Strike, and Scourge Strike, which is for Unholy, but we don't care about that, cause your targets to take 1% increased shadow damage, up to 5% for 15 seconds. Vampiric Strike benefits 300% more from this effect, just making your Heart Strike even stronger. And lastly, to kind of put a nail in the coffin, Gift of the Sandlane. While Vampiric Blood or Dark Transformation is active, you gain Gift of the Sandlane. Gift of the Sandlane increases the effectiveness of your Essence of the Blood Queen by 150%, and Vampiric Strike replaces your Heart Strike and Scourge Strike for the duration. Basically, this is during Vampiric Blood, and I have tested this with Red Thirst. You have 100% uptime on all of the stacks of Essence of the Blood Queen with a very mediocrely geared Blood Decay, giving you access to, I think it's about 10.5% total haste, not to mention the increased damage that you do to all targets and all of the synergies with this. This is just in terms of your actual mechanic and doing damage with the system. But Sandlane has a lot of other cool stuff that you can play with. First of all, it has a choice node with Vampiric Aura and Bloody Fortitude. Bloody Fortitude is fair. It makes your Icebound Fortitude reduce all damage you take by an additional 20% based on your missing health, and killing an enemy that yields experience or honor reduces the cooldown of Icebound Fortitude by 3 seconds. I can definitely see this in Mythic Plus if you need a lot of uptime on Icebound Fortitude, depending depending on how its overall cooldown and uptime is going to be. But you're probably really going to want Vampiric Aura, which is what made Blood Decay super strong in Legion. Now, I don't think it's the same numbers, but first of all, you just get 3% baseline leech. That's great in and of itself. When Lichborn is active, the leech bonus of this effect is increased by 100%, so that's 6%, and it affects 4 allies within 12 yards, essentially giving everybody 6% leech for the duration of Lichborn. And if you remember, there's a talent in the DK class tree called Unholy Endurance, increases Lichborn duration by 2 seconds, and while active, your damage taken is reduced by 15%. So this will become a legit defensive cooldown now and gives everybody leech. 6% leech is nothing to scoff at, especially in high Mythic Plus dungeons where everybody's just blasting left and right consistently. If you time this right, this is kind of like a healer cooldown. But one of the coolest talents that Sand Lane gets is the Blood is Life. Vampiric Strike has a chance to summon a Blood Beast to attack your enemy for 10 seconds. I don't know if they're going to keep the current model, but the Blood Beast essentially looks like the last boss of Onderoth. Yes, a million times yes, this is exactly what I want the Blood Beast to be. Keep it this way, please, Blizzard. Each time the Blood Beast attacks, it stores a portion of the damage dealt. When the Blood Beast dies, it explodes, dealing 50% of the damage accumulated to nearby enemies and healing the Death Knight for the same amount. Now, the healing is relative because it's very hard to kind of time. You're probably going to need weak cards. If you're at full HP, I don't know exactly what happens to the overall healing. I don't know if it turns into an absorb just from this, but the damage is very nice. And the fact that you just have a passive pet that explodes and heals is just incredible. We have the choice node underneath it, Pact of the Sand Lane. You store 50% of all shadow damage dealt into your Blood Beast to explode for additional damage when it expires. It's probably what you want, even more damage. Or Sanguine Scent. Your Death Coil and Death Strike have a 15% increased chance to trigger Vampiric Strike when damaging enemies below 35% health. This is if you don't really want to go too hard onto your Blood Beast. And although Deathbringer just looks so much better, I do have to say that Sand Lane, no matter what spec of the Death Knight I played on, just feels way better. And Death Knight is just looking like a giga winner in the War Within. And you can also check out the Unholy rework that we talked about that also plays Sand Lane and feels incredible with Sand Lane, and you can see exactly what's in store for you coming with the War Within.